This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and driving had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI Horn Hasan of Karmic Evolution Astrology, and I'm coming to you on February 24th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. So before I get into today's astrology, I'll just go through quickly my usual housekeeping stuff, which is, of course, to tell you that you can listen to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking radio show podcast anytime by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled Radio Show. And from there, you can scroll down the page, hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archived listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. Separately, feel free to follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, where you can sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. And lastly, I'm offering still my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight Reader to listeners only for $99. And this reading is for those who are interested in astrology, want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart or your natal horoscope. Those terms are somewhat synonymous, which is essentially a snapshot of the exact position of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth, and it reveals a great deal about you. So when you use a chart reading as a tool for soul growth, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading can be tremendously helpful for learning your soul's true purpose and how to move towards it and towards your highest destiny in this lifetime, to identify patterns of behavior that originated early in life or during past lives or past life karma that may be affecting your relationships or your career, your finances, or your health. But these patterns of behavior may no longer serve your soul's karmic journey as you move forward in this lifetime. And you will also learn insights about what may have tripped your soul up in the past and how to entertain the introduction of new perspectives more relevant to current times, meaning to your current lifetime, so that you can gain greater awareness through astrological insight that ultimately brings greater happiness and satisfaction into your life. Now, all this is easy when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading scheduled as soon as possible. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, now let's get on to this week's Astro news you can use. We're still, as I speak, in the waning portion of this month's lunar cycle since the Leo full moon, which occurred on February 16th. And this reminds us to continue to release any attachment to friends or groups, including family, if such attachments depend on your complete fidelity at the cost of the freedom to express yourself individually. Now, the Leo moon reminded the Aquarius sun then about taking pride in one's individuality and that when we sacrifice our sense of self just to be accepted or loved by others, be they family, community, society in general, or whatever groups we may belong to, this comes at a cost to our pride and our individual creative uniqueness. Now, even though the sun entered empathic spiritual Pisces on February 18th, this Leo full moon energy is still in effect, as I said, until we hit next week's March 2nd Pisces moon, which occurs at 12 degrees and 6 minutes of this empathic water sign designated by two fish yoked together, swimming in two different directions. So you can see the tension there. One is trying to swim out into life, and the other back towards source energy, which is a metaphor for the womb. I've said this before, but the womb is where we had no responsibilities, where everything came easily. We had no worries, no cares. You know, we ate when we wanted, we drank when we wanted, we slept when we wanted, we moved when we wanted. So it's equivalent to that kind of escapist energy that's related to Pisces. It at odds with saying, no, I'm going to go out into the world and live my life, be more martial, more proactive. We know that in the natal chart, well, in the natural chart, right, which begins at zero, it begins with Aries on the ascendant. Natural chart, it begins with 0 Aries. That Neptune's Pisces rules the 12th house. That's the house of the subconscious, but also the area that's akin to being in the womb before the baby gives the signals to put the mother into labor and proactively push itself out, well, with a little help from us mothers, if you know what I mean, those of you who've been there, right? Been there, done that. That, you know, that's the impetus necessary, the energy, the proactivity necessary to come out into life. So being born is a struggle, and Pisces tends to represent the dilemma or the tension between engaging in that struggle to go out and live life proactively versus going back to this protected womb-like environment. So meanwhile, both luminaries, the sun and the moon, are waxing toward a conjunction to Jupiter, which will be at 14 degrees and 16 minutes of Pisces at the Pisces New Moon, which is on March 2nd. And the moon Jupiter exacts on March 3rd, which is a few hours after the exact Pisces new moon, while the sun perfects its exact conjunction with Jupiter on March 5th. So I'll talk more about the Pisces new moon and the specifics of that, both on my Facebook page and its after effects by next week. But the important thing to note here is that the sun's approach to Jupiter, which can play in a number of different ways, is one which I think we're seeing or feeling the effects of now, especially with what's been dominating the news cycle and the airwaves this week, particularly since last night with Vladimir Putin's current invasion into Ukraine. Excuse me. For those not up on the latest news, last night, Vladimir Putin, the head of Russia, ordered Russia's military forces, which have grown to 190,000 strong over the past few weeks, to attack Ukraine. These forces surrounding the eastern, northern, and southern Ukrainian borders were poised to cross these borders, but began to shell Ukraine's major cities, including its capital, Kyiv, last night, our time, which was, I believe, early morning, sometime around 6 a.m., 6 a.m. in the Ukraine. And today, casualties are starting to mount. So, you know, the immediate news that I saw right before I came on air here, the breaking news out of the New York Times was that Russia has captured the Chernobyl power plant and began pushing into the outskirts of Kyiv. All right. So we're going to get into talking about Pluto. When you talk about nuclear power, you're talking Pluto. All right. So Putin claims that Ukraine belongs to Russia historically and has used propaganda, including saying he wants to stop the Nazification of Ukraine, to justify invading that country now. Now, there's a lot inherent in this, so I'm going to try to interpret the broad astrological brushstrokes inherent in this and what's happening now. So as those of you who listen regularly to the show are familiar with the as above, so below astrological mantra, you'll understand that Putin has chosen to try to reclaim land in the form of Ukraine that was once part of the Soviet Union and the Slavic, in recent past 100-year history, and the Slavic Empire from centuries ago. Ukraine has been independent off and on, dating back to the 1200s, and most recently, since the November 8th, 1989 collapse of the Berlin Wall and the subsequent dissolution of the Soviet Union's empire, dated at December 25th, 1991. Now, we know that Mars and Venus conjoined at the Leo full moon back on February 16th at nearly 17 degrees Capricorn, and they've been waxing towards Pluto, which at that lunation was at 27 degrees and 23 minutes of Capricorn. So they're about, a little less than 10 degrees apart. Meanwhile, also at that lunation, the Leo moon exact quincunxed Pluto. And I pointed out last week that adjustment in power dynamics was necessary, and to beware of manipulation of, quote unquote, the people, which the moon represents in mundane astrology, through lies and propaganda, which Pluto can represent. So this Venus-Mars conjunction has been moving ever closer to Pluto, and today they're at almost 23 degrees, while Pluto's still about 2738 Capricorn. So we know planetary energies are at their greatest as they wax toward exact aspects. And we know also that Venus-Mars on its own can represent the coming together of the martial ego drives with the feminine intuitive sense in order to diplomatically broker a contract. And I use the word contract because in this case, of course, they're both transiting through serious business-oriented Capricorn. Now, initially, as these two danced together, we saw a flurry of diplomatic efforts to broker such a contract this past week as Putin's military forces increased in power on Ukraine's border. However, as the lover and the warrior remained in tandem and approached their conjunction to Pluto, we've seen on the world stage lies and manipulations in the form of propaganda trying to justify Russia's take back of Ukraine under the Soviet banner. And why? Reportedly because Putin is still aggrieved about the loss of the power of the Soviet Union dating back now 30 years. So the situation has deteriorated since the Leo full moon as Russia under Putin has decided to take back land that it feels it owns, initially through subterfuge, cyber attacks, and propaganda, and now through outright war. As we head towards the March 2nd Pisces New Moon and the Venus-Mars-Pluto exact conjunctions, it's interesting to note how renowned astrologer Rob Hand describes these energies in his book Planets and Transits. Now, concerning the Venus-Pluto conjunction, in part, he puts it this way, and I'm quoting, "Under this transit, you may be completely fascinated and infatuated with a new lover, but be careful. You may be under the influence of powerful subconscious drives triggered by the encounter that have nothing to do with the real potential of the relationship. In an existing relationship, do not use love to manipulate your partner. There's a strong tendency to use jealousy, guilt, or other negative emotions to control your partner's actions. This can lead only to negative reactions that may eventually weaken the relationship." So I assume you can all understand I'm thinking of Putin and his love affair with the Ukraine and his attempt to control that nation. In addition, Hand describes, again in part, Mars-Pluto conjunctions energies like this, and I quote, "With this transit, you'll be tempted to take over and run whatever is happening around you. This transit is a strong stimulus to any kind of ambition, but the danger is that this energy can be rather violent and disruptive. It represents a ruthless burst of energy, of ego energy, that does not take kindly to limitation. And for those of you who do not know, Mars-Pluto frictional aspects, conjunctions, squares, and oppositions are frequently associated with, as Hans says, violence. And that can include war. It can include anything that causes bloodshed. It can also be associated with rape and sexual abuse. And I'm thinking now that, you know, it's related to that because Pluto is related, of course, to the rape of Persephone in terms of Greek mythology, but also that when a conquering or invading nation goes into another, what do? I mean, one of the things that's historically happened is they rape the women and or rape and or kill the women and or the children, you know, or they subjugate them to a form of slavery. So not a kind energy, no matter how you slice it. Now, so we have a combination of all three here, right? Venus, Mars, Pluto, and Venus, Pluto can be very what I would call venal. You know, I want what I want it now. I want you, I want that, I want the gold, I want the land. And in Capricorn, Capricorn's about business. Capricorn's serious. Capricorn's about structure and foundation. So I want to control the foundations. And that's how you make money, how you produce things. You know, these are all part of how Capricorn is related to the economy in general. I'll mention too, which I hadn't really planned on, is that, you know, the market's been tanking. So financial markets are down. The U.S. stock market is now in correction territory, which is over a 10% drop. The Russian ruble was dropping fast last night. However, I spoke to my ex-husband this morning, who's actually a banker, and he was saying that, I said, why would Putin tank his own, you know, economic situation? And what he said is that what happens is when the ruble falls, Putin and the oligarchs buy more so that eventually when it goes back up, they get richer. But the average person, not so much. Of course, this is related also to gasoline prices, which we're seeing all over the news now because the Germans have, you know, denied the Russians the right to open the pipeline, the gas pipeline that runs through Ukraine, for which they had partnered to buy Russian oil and gas. Mitchell Lewis, who has been on this show numerous times, equates Pluto to anything that you find underneath the Earth's surface, including gas and oil. There's a whole astrological discussion because a lot of us were taught that gas is under Neptune's dominion. However, Neptune represents things you cannot see. So I think in having contemplated it for a while that Pluto may, it makes sense that Pluto represents gas because we dig the gas out from underneath the Earth's surface. But when we change oil into a gaseous form, meaning it's something in the air you cannot see, it then kind of reverts to Neptune's domain. So in other words, if you're breathing in the air and the air is poisonous or toxic, that would be a Neptunian thing. But if you're pumping gas from the gas station that comes out of the Earth, it's a Plutonic rulership. Just a little aside. Okay, so I mentioned last week that the Mercury in Aquarius square to Uranus and Taurus, which perfects today at 9:22 p.m. Eastern Time, today, February 24th, might include accidents related to transportation and or the disruption to and or cutoff of communication. Now, I'm not sure if I mentioned the possibility of cyber attacks, but I remember getting off the air last week and thinking, did I say cyber attacks? Because I should have. But these are certainly part of that energy, particularly because, you know, Mercury's in Aquarius and Uranus rules Aquarius, and that's airborne stuff, or technical stuff, or computer stuff, electronic funds transfer. So, we've indeed seen Russian cyber attacks already on Ukrainian banks that have been reported at least over the past day or two. And in addition, again, at Showtime, speculation existed that President Biden may impose cyber attacks on Russian infrastructure, including probably their banks, as added to the already announced financial sanctions he's imposing. So by now, many of us may be aware that Jupiter's in Pisces and waxing toward a meetup with Neptune there on April 12th. Now, most astrologers agree that this can be a highly spiritual time that could result in a kind of kumbaya, joining of hands energy, but also that, especially since Neptune's Pisces is known as an energy prone to illusion, confusion, and delusion on its more negative archetypal side, that we may experience an exponentially magnified sense of wishful thinking, fantasy, dreaming, pie in the sky, somewhere over the rainbow thinking in the collective. However, this March 2nd Pisces New Moon coming next week has both luminaries headed toward a meetup with Jupiter. So this is before Jupiter meets up with Neptune, but en route to that, of course, Jupiter is in Pisces, Neptune's been Pisces, and I'll remind you that the traditional ruler of the sign Pisces before Neptune was discovered in 1848 was Jupiter ruled Pisces. In modern astrology, he rules Sagittarius. But this gives us this lunation, which has the sun and the moon approaching a conjunction to Jupiter in Pisces, may present us with a precursor of the energies of the upcoming Jupiter-Neptune conjunction. So the sun will become exact conjunct with Jupiter after the Pisces new moon, but it will be waxing at that time. The moon waxes into the exact conjunction with Jupiter the day after on March 3rd, and the sun perfects its conjunction to Jupiter on March 5th. Now, many astrologers consider Sun-Jupiter a fortuitous aspect because it brings with it Jupiter's the great benefic, right? So it's like, hey, good things are going to happen. And that may well be true. It depends on where it's hitting in your chart, right? But it also brings with it a high degree of hubris or arrogance. And again, in Pisces, it contains the element of confusion, illusion, and delusion. So many are now saying that Vladimir Putin's plan to invade Ukraine, which he's carrying out right now, is based on delusional thinking that he's going to get away with it. And to that end, as we move toward the Venus, Mars, Pluto, and the Sun-Jupiter exact conjunctions, March 3rd and March 5th, respectively, we see these energies coming into action now. Now, again, Sun-Jupiter is also akin to the king or the ruler who thinks he's superior to everyone else. And in short, with Pluto in the mix, with Venus, Mars, Pluto, it's about power. Well, I mean, Sun-Jupiter's about power too. It's more normally associated with the benefic ruler, right? But given the other energies around it, what I'm trying to say is, it can also be the dictator or the autocrat. So it could play positively or it could play negatively. But it seems there's little coincidence. I'm sorry. There seems to be little coincidence in the fact that heads of state are reacting now to Putin's recent military moves designed to take back Ukraine under its auspices or rulership, right? As we approach the Sun-Jupiter conjunction this whole week, right? We had the convening of a special meeting at the UN. We have dignitaries making phone calls and NATO conjoining, and, everybody's this flurry of activity, which I said also was related to diplomatic efforts under the waxing Venus-Mars conjunction alone. right? Let's work it out. Let's see what we can do. Let's not fight. Let's discuss. Let's go back to our original relationships contract. A lot of this is inherent in the history of NATO and all that, which I'm not going to bore you with right now. You can find that, anywhere on the internet or in recent news pieces and all that, talking about how President Trump during his administration weakened NATO, but which is the national National Alliance of, I don't even remember, something organization, but it's the Western countries that moved away, like Eastern Europe, Poland and Romania and Slovakia and Ukraine and Georgia, moved away from being held under the umbrella of the Soviet Union back after the Soviet Union collapsed in 91, 92. So again, there's also little surprise that this is all occurring simultaneously to the United States Sibley chart's Pluto return, which exacted over the past 2 days or so, meaning between February 20th and 22nd. Now, I noticed a Facebook post yesterday by an astrologer named Moses Sirigar, who is known by, other astrologers, that I thought summed up this U.S. Pluto return, given the current circumstances right now, both in this country and with this recent invasion of the Ukraine, fairly concisely. So I'd like to read here what he said or posted yesterday on February 23rd. And this is an edited version, okay? And I'm quoting here. The U.S.'s Pluto return is a matter of such gravity that I have recently hesitated to write about it, though I have written about it before and discussed it in terms of the racial animus it has exposed beneath much, if not most, of what is wrong with my country, and no doubt others. The Pluto return was exact on February 20th in tropical astrology using the Sibley chart, which I very much favor and find useful. I've also seen February 22nd given as the date for the tropical return. So what does this all look like? And I would remind everybody to break into my quoting Moses Sirigar right now that, there is no, we can have exact dates, but when you're talking about a planet that takes 248 years to go around the zodiac, there is no instant. As Stephen Forrest would put it, how do you know the exact moment when your kitten becomes a cat? So we're in it. We've been in the Pluto return. A lot of astrologers give it a degree of orb as it approaches, which has been the whole past year, if not more. So, Pluto retrogrades up to 3 to 5 times to a degree. So just bear all that in mind that we're now, we're in it for sure, but we have been for a while, and we will continue to be for a while because Pluto doesn't ingress into 0 Aquarius until 2024. So from now till then, I'm trying to remember if it's March. I think it's March of 2024, but don't quote me on that. I've said it before, but I just don't have that info handy now. So let me go back to what Moses Sirigar was saying about the U.S. Pluto return in the Sibley chart. And I quote again, that America's Pluto is in the 2nd house of the chart in Capricorn shows the massive power of the U.S. economy, real estate, and military industrial complex. And this is what is being activated now. That's a pretty doggone big deal since Pluto is for the first time returning to his position at the birth of our nation, returning to the return of its potential to lead the world in these various ways. But it looks like we will need a great deal of strength and courage along the way, and we'll need to handle our shame with more grace. And again, I remind you, Pluto return, and I've had guests on the show, including, of course, Mitchell Lewis, who I mentioned before, who are, the Pluto return is digging up all the crap, all the shadow side since the beginning of this nation. Okay, back to Moses Sirigar. So, like a human being facing the reality check, the USA is now and again facing its own racist shadow, testing the fundamental security of its democracy as the losing side seems to be losing patience with voting, as many are giving in to great lies told by the former president, who lost in a virtual landslide of 7 million votes after failing to lead around the pandemic in 2020. And now we are facing whatever comes next, such as the martial developments between Russia and Ukraine. Many Western astrologers focused on the recent dates for the tropical Pluto return. And again, he says, it's February 20th or 22nd, but widen our vision just a smidge. And we find the most significant moment of the Pluto return in tropical astrology, which is what we're talking about here, Western tropical. And that is the cluster occurring March 2nd and 3rd as Venus, Mars, and Pluto all conjoin the natal U.S. Pluto at the exaltation degree of Mars. This March 1st to March 3rd looks like a very big boon. And now I'll just interject that in between the two on March 2nd is this Pisces New Moon, which will be waxing toward its conjunction to Jupiter in Pisces. Sirigar goes on to say, my first thought about that symbolism is unfortunately very bloody. Though the symbolism of blood can also mean heroically giving up one's own blood, such as to help the injured, even up to the point of being willing to die for a noble cause, such as the one the soldier believes is just. Often the most notable bravery comes with real personal sacrifice and willingness to bleed, metaphorically or not. And we're seeing that in Ukraine right now. So is this a moment that could draw us into a bloody military conflict? And of course, he's talking about the U.S. And he answers himself, yes, certainly the potential for such a conflict is there. And we are certainly tied into that event with a great deal of fate shown in the heavens. Even if the recent developments in Ukraine don't seem to get us enmeshed right away, this powder keg could still come to be seen as significant in hindsight. In the best case scenario, we use our might to influence the situation in Ukraine for the better and come out somehow on top or even prevent the worst. But the symbolism around death and bloodshed also seems much too strong to ignore with a very optimistic reading of our might. The U.S.'s strength and resilience will be tested, certainly, but there's also a Plutonian strength in the U.S. chart that shouldn't be ignored or underrated. I remember back in the 90s realizing that the U.S. would have a Pluto return around this time. Back then, the 2020s seemed like the futuristic stuff of science fiction. But my first thought then was that the U.S. would have to face some of its most serious and darkest karma around this time. And what came to mind for me were the atomic bombs we dropped on Japan, though I should have also thought about our treatment of African slaves and their descendants. So I thought then perhaps even something on a terrible scale to balance our actions in World War II, where we also acted as heroes and saved innocents, but that the U.S. would have a certain karma to face. And Pluto wants to make sure that we go deep all the way in and get the job of that deep healing done. The protests and counter-protests following the murder of George Floyd in broad daylight set another ball of American yarn unraveling as we struggle to understand the complexity of concepts such as Black Lives Mattering, and that critical race theory means that we ought to consider that race is a critical part of our history and thus present. Now, that's the end. No, is that the end of the quote? Hang on a second. Hang on, no, this continues on. I just had messed up my doc. The Venus, Mars, Pluto, I'm still quoting him, configuration is a triple planetary war, a concept from Vedic astrology. This not only massively amplifies with intensity, but then amplifies again, a conjunction that is already full of omens of martial excess, death, and rebirth, and the disruption of peace and spilling of blood. This affects the entire world because it occurs over the entire world. Though we hope that cooler heads will prevail, it seems unlikely given the historic and unusual nature of this conjunction in the midst of an exceedingly long Venus-Mars conjunction, which of course takes place in Capricorn. When the conjunction shifts to tropical Aquarius, look for the contentious, rebellious energies in America, including potential violence by people led by cultish thinking, to pick up steam as well. And I'm going to interject here that both Mars and Venus will ingress into Aquarius on March 5th. And then their exact, second, third exact conjunction occurs, this is their third conjunction, occurs in the ideological sign of Aquarius. So they're moving out of Capricorn and into Aquarius on March 5th. Again, 2 days after the March 2nd, 2-3 days after March 2nd, Pisces New Moon, and the same day that the Sun conjoins Jupiter in Pisces. Now back to Moses Sirigard. Quote, but it is also important to remember that we have things like astrology to warn us in advance and to help us navigate life's territory. That we can see the planetary movements well in advance ensures that we have this gift and potential. But for the United States of America, already embroiled in its own cold civil war, with its democracy already limping along after the sedition of January 6th, is astrologically very, very tied into whatever is going on in the world right now. And it shows that whatever is happening now is not only key to our rebirth, but that it could also be a means of the U.S. becoming even more powerful. I wouldn't bet against the U.S. to have plenty of martial options up its sleeves. The United States has, if nothing else, an incredible capacity to fight its way to a rebirth. Sometimes that powerful second house Pluto will take us straight to Hades' realm, including our horrific historical ugliness and trauma around race that we are still very much struggling to heal, or to the depths of the burning of Atlanta in the Civil War, of Chicago, the flooding of Katrina and Superstorm Sandy, of school shootings and Juneteenth. Wildfires whip us about, and drought starves the land. We can't even agree on a vaccine anymore in the middle of a 100-year pandemic, or he should say once in a 100-year pandemic, and outrageous lies told by a losing president have placed us on the path to another bloody and contentious general election. All of this weakness has perhaps convinced Russia and China that America can't even keep itself together, much less stop them from taking what they feel should belong to them, such as Ukraine and Taiwan. We aren't in Kansas or the 1980s or 1990s anymore. Those who have grown up during these times have in many ways taken a break from the more serious and dramatic phases of human history. But 2020 changed everything with the Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter Saturn conjunctions. This is, and I'll add, those were in Capricorn, Saturn, Pluto in January 12th of 2020, and the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in Aquarius in late December of 2020. He concludes, this is a new era of human history, and while the coming Jupiter-Neptune conjunction in double Pisces will allow for some truly amazing spiritual experiences, it will also exacerbate all of the dangerous fantasies that are making our reality rather unstable, even leading to a massive eruption of deluded political, religious, and quasi-thinking. Other than being involved in the real world, all you can really do is take a deep look at your own shadow and start there. With Venus and Mars hanging around Pluto, your own shadows around love and sexuality and pain and trauma and even war are right here before you. And as above, so below. The world waits to see the trauma of war unfold. There is an external world that must be addressed too, but the wounds and the healing, and thus even the magic of life, begins within. End quote. So he did a much better job than I would have. So, I hope that everybody got out of that what he was imparting. Now, I had posted that I was going to take a look at Putin's chart and also at Ivanka Trump's and Donald Jr.'s, because they've been all in the news recently, but I don't think I'm going to have time to do the latter two. So I'd like to take a deeper dive first into Putin's natal chart now. But first, I want to read something that I posted recently in a Facebook thread, which was in response, before the troops went in to Ukraine, but in a discussion about Putin, and I was thinking, obviously, about the astrology. So what I wrote was, while Putin's brand of fascism, as Merriam-Webster defines it, includes, quote, a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader that exalts nation and often race above the individual, end quote, seems to focus on keeping all those of Slavic ancestry under one authoritarian umbrella, Americans on the right who fear diversification of their population from a white majority to one dominated by black and brown citizens, seeks to restrict power to whites only. The overlap is obvious. From "you belong to us" to "we don't want your kind here." Putin's former cry seeks, which I'm saying Putin says, to the Ukraine, "You belong to us. We want you back," right? I'm the lover, the spurned lover. Putin's former cry seeks to expand to include all those he deems of the same quote unquote race or ancestry, while that of the American right wing, made of prejudiced conservatives, including religious fundamentalists, seeks to exclude all who don't fit their criteria. And this goes back to what I was saying about the Leo New Moon, the auspices of which we're still under. One thing is clear, no matter how you slice it, both are fascist concepts. And Americans who applaud Putin's current threats to expand its empire by forcing Ukraine and its citizens to remain tethered by blood, read race, to their notion of Russia über alles, are simply projecting their same desire to contract their citizenry into only those who fit their description of who should be included. Read, white, basically, right? So we've got an expansion contraction of groups going on here. And that relates to something that Moses Sirigar pointed out, which is the 2020 Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius. Jupiter is 1 foot on the gas pedal, Saturn 1 foot on the brake. What's ironic about both these situations is that neither entity is woke enough, and I use that term meaning as in awake enough, literally, to recognize the reality. Russians and Ukrainians live together and coexist perfectly peacefully when left alone. And I'm sure that over the centuries, there's been plenty of intermingling of blood. Likewise, right-wing Americans seem to have zero concept of how much its population has integrated, especially over the past 2-3 generations or so. So if we look at the denial of this reality that virtually stares us all in the face, we can see that those who refuse to accept these facts deserve to be called old-fashioned, rigid, too boundaried or restricted in their metastasized ideological thinking. And those who moved forward, intermarried, coexisted peacefully with partners of different colors and religions and genders, or had children who have done so, and coexisted at home, at work, and in the community, have progressed toward a reality that shifted humanity's values toward a more peaceful, all-inclusive, loving, humanitarian future. And then I had written Saturn in Uranus, square Uranus and Taurus, anyone, right? So the resistance is Saturn, Uranus is the progression, right? Now, I want to get into, in the last couple of minutes I have, a little bit of a delineation of Vladimir Putin's natal chart. I have a note here saying that somebody just before airtime said on the news that Putin is willing to break the current order. So hold that thought for a minute. Putin's birth data is October 7th, 1952. They have him as 9:30 a.m. birth time in St. Petersburg's Russia. But this is rated DD by Astro Databank, which is one of the authorities on the timing of birth charts. So that means that it is up for discussion. So I don't use the birth time, meaning I don't pay attention to his ascendant or how the house wheels factor out in his natal chart. I'm looking only at the aspects to what's in his chart, right? Because the only thing you don't know about if you don't know the time is the moon. So here's what I have to say about his chart. And again, I had written this also in response to someone on Facebook. He's coming up, Putin, to a, let me reword this because this was something I didn't have a chance to edit. Putin has in his natal chart, hang on one second, let me just get it up on my screen so I can look at it, so I can go with the flow. which is the easiest thing to do for me. His natal chart, regardless of where the planets are located, has a 13-degree 55-minute Libra Sun conjunct Saturn at 1727 Libra. And both of them square Uranus at 18 degrees 23 minutes of Cancer. So we have a natal square of the Sun to Uranus and Saturn to Uranus. Now, you know, he's a Libra, which I think shocks most people, but he's been described as either indecisive or taking a very long time to make a decision. You know, from the reporters and others who cover him, both internally in Russia and externally from other countries. But, you know, Sun Saturn is boundaried. I don't know much about his childhood. I was trying to research it, but I couldn't find much. So, you know, I would say he had a strong father, but he also has a Saturn conjunct Neptune. So he's a Sun at 13, almost 14, Saturn at 17 and a half, Neptune at 21 degrees Libra, and Mercury at 23. Though, to me, this is a stellium in Libra. In psychological astrology, Saturn Neptune is a weak father, right? I've mentioned that before. I think it's like the father who takes out the belt to beat you because you've done something quote unquote bad, but he cries while he's beating you and he says, this is hurting me a lot more than it's hurting you. But to further expand on that concept, well, and then Saturn, Uranus is rebellious, right? But it remains to be seen how that rebelliousness played out in his early life. But we know it's somewhere in the past life karma. Now, on top of that, he's got a south node in Leo at approximately 18 and a half degrees Leo, which is opposed by an 18 and a half degree north node in Aquarius. And in evolutionary astrology, we want to take the positive aspects of Leo, which is the creative, individualistic, you know, unique identity one has, and bring it forward, but to join it with the group, particularly for humanitarian causes. So South Node in Leo, when we want to move karmically to follow our soul's karmic destiny, we want to leave behind the negative traits of Leo. It's all about me. Look at me. I'm the only one here. You don't count. You know, I mean, you know, Leo likes to perform, right? But true Leo performs for no one. It just performs because it can't contain itself. It's inherently creative. I'm going to do this. I'm going to dance. I'm going to sing. I'm going to paint. I'm going to do whatever because I feel it inside. And it's about being in that moment and understanding that the spark is inspiration that then results in creative expression. And that's why it's related to procreation and to children also. So, and also to love affairs, right? The spark, right, inspires us to go, wow, look at her or look at him, you know, I'm attracted. But it's to leave behind the negative aspects of look at me, it's all about me, as I said, right? I'm the ruler, because Leo is also connected in Greek and Roman mythological terms archetypally to the leader or the ruler or to royalty. So thinking you're the king. So Putin came in thinking he's the king, right? And his soul's mission is to move towards this North Node in Aquarius, which is to take his individual aptitudes and gifts and apply them to the betterment of mankind. But what tripped him up in past life karma is the fact that he has a very tight square between the nodes are squared tightly to his 19 degree 44 Jupiter in Taurus. And that Jupiter is opposed by Venus at 11, almost 12 degrees of Scorpio. So that's a that's a waxing aspect, right? Venus moves faster than Jupiter. It's waxing towards an exact opposition, and it squares the nodes also. So Venus, Jupiter, the way that I describe that in frictional aspect is how much is too much? No much. Bring it on. You want one? Give me two. Yeah, screw that. Give me five. No, give me a million, right? So it's always wanting to expand. And since it squares the nodal axis, someone like evolutionary astrologer Stephen Forrest would said the Venus opposite Jupiter in Putin's chart represents a skipped step. So he may have gotten blinded. We all know he's one of the richest men in the world. So he got blinded by wealth, right? Jupiter in Taurus, Venus in Scorpio, and that because these two square the nodal axis here, he is, held back from achieving his more humanitarian purposes in this lifetime. Now, the other thing is that the natal Saturn square Uranus is in the collective right now, and astrologers like Michael Luton will say anytime the sky mirrors an aspect that's in your natal chart, you will have a recurrence of that energy. So what I want to say is that Jupiter alone and square to the nodes is a crisis in faith. Okay, what sustains us? Our faith. And that this is a man who clearly has, had himself photographed, wrestling tigers and bare chested, and he's not a big guy, and, he looks real macho and all that. So he's got this false sense of machoism, which I describe by that Saturn-Neptune conjunction. But the outer persona is, I'm a nice guy, I'm a Libra, right? But it's conjoined to Saturn. So it's like, I'm a Libra, but you need to probably do it my way within my boundaries, or, screw you, right? So what I've noticed is that he's playing into the collective zeitgeist now, and that, he's got progressed Mars on his north node. He's got transiting Saturn on his north node. And what's going to happen is that transiting Saturn and Uranus are going to come back into a closer square over starting around September. From like mid-September to the end of October, leading up to the U.S. election, and that this will trigger, because it's going to mimic his 17, 18 degree Saturn square his 18 degree Uranus, right, cardinal, from Libra to Cancer, and Uranus meanwhile will come along and it oppose his Saturn and square his, trigger this Saturn square Uranus. So, and with Pluto on the Mars on the north node, when it plays negatively, I said Mars is on his north node, clearly spurring aggressive behavior around what he wants, but likely while he's completely unconscious about what his soul actually needs. And this type of disconnection is clearly shown by his natal Jupiter square to his nodes, denoting that he came into this lifetime with a lack of faith and doubt in himself, further echoed by his strongman attitude, which is really an overcompensation of his Sun, Saturn, and Saturn, Neptune natal conjunctions. Now, the latter can show the ego's fear of the unconscious and the building of strong walls that block out the unconscious. In short, this is a soul who tries to buffer himself against what his ego perceives to be a threatening tidal wave of the unconscious, which actually really translates, if you play it all the way out, into madness. And so hence, like I said, all his uber masculine projections of himself belie how weak he really feels internally. Having said all that, that doesn't mean he won't trigger World War III eventually, but it does show that he plays an important role in the zeitgeist right now, again, due to the Saturn-Uranus square triggering his chart's own Saturn-Uranus square now and over about the next 6 months or so. So, I think it's really important to recognize his role. And what's going to happen is Saturn is on his north node now, but it's going to go forward and then retrograde back. And Uranus, which is at 11 something now, is going to go forward and hit that square his nodes and hit that Jupiter. And again, those will come into play more seriously around September 27th, I think it is. So we want to watch for that period, because this is a crisis period. And, the only thing I see is at the same time, transiting Uranus is going to sextile his natal Uranus. But, as we speak right now, transit Uranus is directly opposing his natal Venus at 11 in Scorpio. So he's breaking away, right? Oppositions are always about relationships. Uranus is always about freedom. And Venus in Scorpio, which is his natal sign, is, I want all the riches. I want all the control. I want everything from the oil underneath the ground, Pluto, Scorpio, to the money in the banks, the fall of the Russian ruble, like I said, so he can scoop up more money, which in turn gives him more power. And what I had said was that this aspect also is a little bit like, as we're watching Venus Mars apply to the conjunction to Pluto in the sky, it's like, let me stalk my old girlfriend for a while and then I'll go in for the kill. And I actually posted this on Facebook the other night. I said, as the sirens sound in Kyiv, so I can't tell you all what's going to happen. I can only say that there's an explanation for how the energies are building. And as Moses Sirigar said, we got to watch this next week, especially as we hit that hubristic, potentially delusional energy at the March 2nd Pisces New Moon. And as those aspects perfect with the Sun and Jupiter, because we're looking at, given the collective insanity, crazy, as Sirigar pointed out, over all the things that have happened in this country domestically, as we are being invited to actually analyze our shadow energies, that we've got a lot of work to do. All right, so on that note, thank you, everyone, for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week on March 3rd for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.